Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Beth Bell, and I'm here today to talk about incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion directly into what your research development office does. I serve as the staff scientist in the Office for Research Development and Scholarly Activity at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, but I also serve as our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Research Specialist, and I am housed in our medical school, which is a school of community medicine, indicating that we have a strong focus on working with communities, which is one of many reasons why our offices focus so much on diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything we do. In the summer of 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement was at its current peak, somebody in our office, one of our faculty affiliate members, suggested that we work on some diversity, equity, and inclusion guidelines for research at our university. And for me, I'm a bold thinker, I'm loud, and I had a lot of other ideas. I sent a group of people in our office, including our VPR, a list of at least 10 ideas I had that I wanted us to do. I felt I would get lucky if we did one. And there are so many, I wanted to waive application fees for students of color into our medical school. I knew that wasn't going to happen, but I asked. I asked for many things along these lines. And you don't get what you don't ask for, which is the major takeaway I want you to have of this presentation. And I would say ask early and often. I'm a very persistent person. I'll ask again and again. I guess that's how I was raised. And so I brought up these ideas in a very bold way, hoping we would do at least one. And if you do something like this, you need an ally in your corner. For me, that ally was our VPR. I don't have that much power. You need somebody with influence at your university to share your ideas with. This could be a dean, this could be HR, student services, your DE&I office, and in my case, our VPR. And he was supportive. He said, Sarah Beth, you've been very bold, but I do like it. And, that made me excited because I knew he was going to listen to me. And I do think, although I gave an array of ideas to him and the rest of that group, you do have to focus on one idea at a time. I'm a psychologist and I think about foot in the door versus door in the face. So foot in the door is trying to get somebody to do something little and maybe they'll do something bigger later. What we call door in the face is where you ask for everything in the world, but you might get one thing. So these are kind of two sides of the same coin, and I came at it from both ends. But as I mentioned earlier, one of our affiliate faculty had talked about our office creating a document which was evidence-based about appropriate ways to include race in your research. And so I was willing that that was where we should start. And I thought that would be important and powerful. Another place that I wanted to start was IRB policy updates, and I will discuss that in further detail. First, I want to show a little snippet of what our guidelines looked like and what that process was like. So yes, taking a deeper dive into RD guideline documents. I will say first, we have a document on race and research. We do not have other documents that I would like us to develop about LGBTQ plus people, intersectionality, gender, disability, all types of things, but this is what we have for now. So on our RD website, we have a document that's about 10 pages long with evidence-based information about appropriate ways to report race in your research, incorporate race into your research, report things correctly with sensitivity and thinking about everything in a structural context. And this document, it took about a year to develop, and honestly, we probably could have done it faster. And I'm sure you guys can relate when there's something very collaborative going on. It can seem to drag out, and that's okay. But we did end up with, I would say, this fabulous document that has important guidelines for including race in your research. And I think one of the most key things about this document is that we had a checklist on it. The second page, a checklist of what we were talking about. And that helped us better show, you get this long document and it seems like you're going to read it all, but at the end of the day, you kind of want it boiled down too, and you can go from there. So we did construct this checklist, and that has been really more useful than anything in this document. But the people who want further detail can read on. We have different areas in this document. We have things about statistical analyses that would not be relevant to everybody, but would be very relevant to some people. And we even have links to further resources beyond this document. Now, let's talk about taking a deeper dive into IRB policies, another good place to start. So here is some information on some things I am working on with our IRB right now. And I just want to say from the bat, these were not my ideas mostly. I've collected these ideas from the Multi-Regional Clinical Trials Center, University of Minnesota, Medical University of South Carolina, ASU, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, University of Tulsa, which is where I'm from, a science special issue on policy and justice. A publication that was in there is fabulous. That whole issue is a huge resource. And the Child Trends Research Institute. And these ideas also draw from our office project coordinator, Amy Abercrombie, as well. So she and I have been working together to develop ideas on how to get our IRB to be a little bit more progressive and a little bit more justice-minded in our research guidelines. So again, I had to get the attention of somebody important, and I got the attention of the IRB chair, who is affiliated with our office. Our VPR is a former IRB chair. And now we're in a working group that has people of an influence that I feel like a small one. And we have a provost in that group, and we're talking about all kinds of ways to enhance DE&I practices on our campus. But we determined, I kind of steered people, let's have a focus. We can't solve diversity overnight. Let's focus on the IRB first. That's concrete. We have the people involved that we can work with. And so here are some of the things that we are trying to implement with our IRB. And that is an iterative process. But these are the things we have suggested. First of all, this was our IRB chair's idea. We talk about who we include in our research, and we talk about exclusion criteria, but we don't make people justify why a certain population is excluded. And of course, this is related to human subjects research. One thing that our IRB chair had noticed is a lot of times, kind of even by default, adults 65 and older are not included in research studies, but 65 is not that old. And so we think people should have to justify if they have that age bracket. If you don't have your study in languages other than English, you should explain why that is, why you don't have that resource. And certainly you may not, but you should explain why that is. You should explain whether or not you're providing transportation to your participants, especially if they're in a special population where that would be likely to be needed. Um, our IRB has had trouble including undocumented people in our research, and that has been a huge point of contention with me with our IRB. It's related to how people get paid and having to fill out a form for getting paid that includes your social security number. So this actually really doesn't come from the IRB. This comes from kind of accounting practices at our university, but the IRB is the organization that may have some influence to change that for research purposes. Some research studies only include straight people. And I can tell you that I've done one on romantic attraction like that. I'm bisexual. The PI was bisexual. We were collaborating, but we wanted to understand romantic attraction, and we felt we would be best set with a sample of straight people for the kind of research questions that we were asking, which was kind of ironic, but that can happen. And we, in my opinion, should have had to justify that further. We should have had to provide a lot more information on why we made that choice in our research. I do MRI research. We don't really like to have left-handed people in our research. It has to do with brain regions being more variable in left-handed people, and I should be asked to explain that. And then there's certain health conditions and justifying why they're not included. Some studies say no mental illnesses, but really there are probably some that are on the spectrum that shouldn't prohibit a person from participating. So these are just some things we want people to address, and how we want them to address it is we want to put a new write-in box on our IRB portal and a new suggested part of our protocols that make you justify what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be long, but we think it will help people think more ultimately about who they're including and who they're excluding in their research studies. We in our office, we are really, really big on involving the community in the design of studies, in the interpretation of studies, and in a way where findings are presented back to the community. So this is discussed at length in the document we developed, but in addition, we want the IRB forms to have in the protocol suggestions, like strong suggestions that you discuss if you're going to be able to do this, and if so, how. So it's kind of like this section where you say who you're including and excluding. We want a section that says, how is the community involved in your research? Are they involved in design, interpretation, or ways to present back to the community? And we cannot require that. It's a big change. But when we ask that question, it can get people thinking about how might they be able to do that. We have a fantastic researcher at OU who is doing work on people living with HIV. And she involved people from a center with a lot of HIV positive people in designing her study. And she has just recently had a community breakfast thing where people who are from that center who helped design it got to learn more about the findings. I think she's a model example of how we could be doing this. So there's other examples of how to involve the community. A passion area of diverse people for me is people who use drugs. And we do study addiction challenges a lot in the social behavioral world that I'm in related to medicine. But when we're studying those things, a lot of times we don't have people reaching out to people who use drugs. So you're not asking the right people how to ask the right questions. There are health outreach organizations for people who use drugs. They might do HIV and Hep C testing. There are needle exchange centers. There are local boots on the ground mutual aids group for harm reduction. It's really important to try to think of getting a hold of some of these people and asking for their feedback in designing your study and in sharing your results. We also, in our School of Community Medicine, do research with people experiencing homelessness or unhoused people. And consulting with shelters is good. Consulting with anybody in that shelter that's willing to talk to you and is very comfortable with that is better. If this study is about racial bias, you need to be consulting racial minorities. That cannot be more important. Sometimes nonprofits that address racial disparities are a good place to start. Community leaders focusing on advocacy for people of color also do have valuable perspectives. And other diverse population examples would include LGBTQ plus people, HIV positive people, veterans, and more. We wanted to require people to say how the research benefits the target population, but also strongly encourage people to share the results back to the community. It's kind of hard if you have to say the research doesn't benefit this population. So we found that to be important. This is a template drawn from the PRIDE study for sharing results back with a community. So the PRIDE study is a really huge longitudinal study on LGBTQ plus health. And I know about this because I'm a participant in it. And every time they have a new finding, they have a brief summary of what they found, and then they have sections. What did we do? What was new, innovative, or notable? What did we learn? What does this mean for our communities? And what's next? This is such a good template for sharing results back to the community. And I get these emails that have this information. I think we should add a DE&I IRB research specialist to our IRB. I have not found any schools that are doing this, but I think it would be really cool if on our IRB there was a person, a scientist, or a different kind of qualified person whose sole job was to make sure that the IRB was doing things as inclusively as possible, offer suggestions to investigators on how they can make their study more inclusive and things along those lines. So I will give you a second to look over this kind of busy slide of outcomes we have had so far. So we made a research development committee, and they helped make that race and research guidelines document. We have had some initiatives, a consultation service. So our office now offers consultations for DE&I research. That's a new service we offer. We have a poster session every year, and that's for the trainees. And we have added DE&I guidelines. Might have made them a little bit too long, but I added some of those. And we've also added an award for research that is gold star standards of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've written a popular press article with our DE&I office. It's a nice way to collaborate. I've helped develop a cross-campus award about DE&I. And this is a really busy slide. So I'll try not to linger too long, but if you want to look over it for a second. So this has what we're doing, but this has what we have done, but what we are doing. Notably, we are working with HR on best practices for hiring people that are more diverse, including researchers. I am now sponsoring a student group on research with regard to race and diverse identities. I am the PI of a project that's related to DE&I, where every student got to ask their own sub-research questions related to DE&I. We are improving the IRB guidelines, as I discussed. We are improving early faculty training, and we are making policies for future research across our tri-campus area. I'm really big on ask culture versus guest culture. To take it back to where we started here, ask culture, a lot of people don't have that kind of mindset. It means you'll just ask for stuff. And, if they say no, you're like, well, I could have asked. Guest culture is you don't ask for something unless you think it's very appropriate. But if you don't ask for something, the answer is always no. So to me, ask culture is one of the most key parts of implementing DE&I in your office. Please feel free to contact our office. We are at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. Here is our website, our email, our phone number, and I certainly hope I may hear from some of you. Thank you for listening to this presentation today.